Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you this afternoon. Standing here in front of you at the end of a day of presentations of some incredible science, some really exciting opportunities in improving clinical care, and some challenging economics, I have to admit to feeling a complete fraud. If you look at your programme, you've got at least one Professor Sir, a whole raft of professors, and a load of people with PhDs and MDs and what have you who've been talking to you. I'm none of those. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I've never made a drug. I've never treated a patient. I haven't planned a service. What I am, though, is a patient advocate. And what I want to do this afternoon is to talk to you about patient expectations in this process of pharmacogenomics, pharmacogenetics, and how that can be translated into health gain. You know, the rhetoric around stratified medicine, I mean, we've all heard it. You know, the idea of the right medicine in the right dose to the right person at the right time. You know, what's not to like? I mean, it's ideal, isn't it? It's what any patient or any doctor would want to be able to deliver in the context of the healthcare system. And if that were possible, then it would truly be fantastic. But, and there is always a but, you know, if only it were that simple. You know, what we need to create within the context of healthcare today is a framework which will maximize the chances of that happening, so that the likelihood of patient benefit and the risk of significant adverse events happening, that calculation can be worked out to best advantage, so that, you know, we aim to do the best we can with the medicines, the therapies we've got available, and try and minimize or mitigate the risk of harm. So we need to change the framework for stimulating the development of innovative therapies that are targeted at unmet medical needs. We need to be aiming to create something that is sustainable, that is equitable, and that is accessible to patients who need to benefit from it in a timely and a user-friendly way. You know, some of the research that's been presented to you today is indicative of just how exciting, of just how we are living at a time of unprecedented opportunity. You know, we are the first people who have ever walked this planet who have the potential to understand the mechanism of disease at the molecular level and to create the tools that will allow us to change that mechanism for the better. Now, you know, what a time to be alive, when you can begin to see ways of tackling the diseases that have blighted mankind since the first Homo sapiens stuck his head above the edge of the Olduvai Gorge in the Rift Valley 200,000 years ago and looked about and said, blow me, I've got hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Where did that come from? But unfortunately, it's not axiomatic that good things will be allowed to happen. You know, there is a perfect storm brewing out there. You know, we have the increased opportunity that comes from the knowledge that we've heard about that's being generated today. But for the health service, it's also a time of increased demand. We all know about the demographic pressures that the health service is under. You know, thanks to progress in science, thanks to changes in public health, we're living longer. We're living longer with increasingly complicated combinations of disease. You know, we have got rising expectations. You know, the old days when patients were happy to go along to their GP and get a bottle of stuff that said the mixture or the tincture or the medicine and go away and do what they were told with it are long since gone. And of course, as we all know, the health service is struggling to meet demands in the face of diminished resources. So what do patients and families want in this sort of context of increased opportunity and downward pressures on the system. I think the most important thing that we want is to see a genuine, a true commitment to engage with us right across the spectrum of therapy development, from the moment you have that bright idea to the point at which the therapy, the intervention is made available to the patients who stand to benefit. That means that right from the get-go, we should be involved in framing the question and in defining what the answer to that question would look like. You know, you all know that with some diseases that you have, there are some aspects of that condition that really spoil your day. And there are other aspects, well, they're a nuisance, but you can live with them. So let's make sure that when we're developing therapies, we're concentrating on those things that really spoil our days, because those are the things that are likely to make the biggest difference, and those are the things that are most likely that the health service will make available to us if that development is successful. We want to be involved in framing the development program so that the research fits to our lives rather than expecting our lives to fit in to your development program. You know, funnily enough, we were not put on this earth to give you interesting things to do. We were here, we have our conditions. We didn't choose to have things which are intractable, which are difficult to treat. And often simple changes in the way in which you go about things will make a real difference to your chances of success. It's a simple example, but it's, you know, with hindsight, it's obvious. There was a program a few years ago in Leeds and the Yorkshire area, which was looking at dentition in elderly people over the age of 80. And of course, you know, if you've got good teeth, you can chew better, you're likely to be better nourished, you're likely to be better able to resist adventitious infections and so on and so forth. And the team found huge difficulties in recruiting elderly people to come and join the thing. They say, well, why aren't you coming? I mean, you know, you get a free meal, it's warm, you meet lots of people. They said, look, my bus pass doesn't kick in till 9:30. So if you want me there for 9 o'clock, I've got to buy a bus ticket, and I can't on a pension. And then, you know, you give me my lunch, fine, that's great, that's splendid. And then you kick me out at 3:30 in the afternoon. I don't know how many of you have been on a bus at 3:30 in the afternoon recently when the secondary schools come out. I mean, you know, they don't need an engine. They're powered by the testosterone that is swilling down the gutters. It's a terrifying place to be, you know, for an able-bodied adult, much less somebody who's maybe not so good on their feet and a bit frail. So think about the design when you're thinking about what the question is you want to ask and how it's going to fit. We also want to say in the benefit and risk calculation, just as not all benefits are of equal value, not all risks are of equal acceptability. You know, if you have Duchenne muscular dystrophy, then the thing that's going to kill you ultimately is heart failure. So if you have a potential therapy for which one of the potential serious adverse events is an increased risk of cardiac involvement, then, you know, we're not going to play, because, you know, the families, the boys, they want to maximize their lives, and that's probably a risk that they won't feel is worth running. We need support to participate as well. You know, if it's going to be disruptive for our lives, then how are we going to fit in with your development program if we have to think about, you know, our children who might need collecting from school, or, you know, or whether we're going to get home in time to be able to meet the needs of our family, and so on. And we need a part to say in the determination of the values of the therapy. Previous speaker made the point about cost effectiveness calculations not looking at the impact on the family economy in many cases. But they also don't look at necessarily the value of the change. I have a friend who receives enzyme replacement therapy for an inborn error of metabolism. As a result of that, her lung volume has increased by 4%, which for most of us is neither here nor there. But for her, it means that she's no longer dependent all the time on artificial assisted respiration. So she can take the mask off her face. She can have a conversation and smile at you. She can interact with you more normally because what she's saying is not hidden by this thing that she needed in order to help her breathe. So think about the value in real life as well as the things that can be measured when determining the value. Genomics and whole genome sequencing is opening up this prospect of molecular level precision in diagnosis. So phenotypically similar diseases are fragmenting into genomically distinct subsets, which will potentially require different solutions, which obviously opens up the possibility of stratified medicines being developed, but it also creates problems for the regulatory and the HTA environment, which will impact on the likelihood of patients getting access. The regulators, the Medicines Agency, the MHRA, the EMA, the FDA, and all these other collections of initials need to think about how they are going to evaluate innovations in terms of their quality, safety, and efficacy when you can no longer use the gold standard of the large multi-center randomized placebo-controlled double-blind clinical trial. Now, regulators are naturally conservative. That's right and proper, conservative with a small p, I hasten to say. Regulators are naturally conservative because they are the guarantors of the probity of the system on behalf of me, of patients, of families, of society at large. They have to say that they make a decision that this drug is safe enough to be allowed onto the market for use in clinical practice. And the regulators are obliged, in a sense, by that responsibility to take the Jeremy Paxman approach when evaluating a dossier that's put forward by a company for a marketing authorization. Jeremy Paxman notably once said that when he is interviewing a person, particularly a politician, I don't know why he should think that this was a particularly appropriate question to think about when interviewing a politician, but Jeremy Paxman said, whenever I go to interview a politician, the first question I always ask is the question I ask myself, and that's, why is this lying bastard lying to me? And the regulators are the same, because there you are, you're the company, you're bringing your dossier, they are desperate to find out if there is a question you should have asked that you didn't, so they can send you back to ask it before they give you your marketing authorization, or a question you did ask and you know the answer to, but you're not telling them because it influences their likelihood of saying yes to your application. So it's a tough position to be in, and if you can't produce the randomized clinical trial type data, how are we going to generate the evidence that will allow regulators to be comfortable with allowing things onto the market? There are steps being taken, adaptive pathways, novel frameworks for clinical trials, early access schemes, and so on. And then once you've got your marketing authorization, of course, there's getting the HTA, getting the calculations done effectively that we heard about before. And that, again, needs ways of looking at the real value of innovation and the worth of the change that is brought about through the uptake of the drug. And that must include the impact on patients and families. It must take account of the fact that, if somebody is less in need of care, then that allows for the carers, who are often parents or partners or whatever, potentially, to have a better quality in their life, maybe to go out to work again or whatever. If somebody has a better quality of life, then the likelihood of mental health problems in other family members, which is well documented, is likely to be mitigated and reduced. That has to save money for the health service. So we need to factor in these other issues in order to get a true sense of the value of an innovation. And we also need a commitment to ensuring the delivery of the therapy to the patients who stand to benefit from it once it's approved. You know, the best drug in the world is useless if it stays on the pharmacy shelf and doesn't actually make it through to the patient, to the who needs to take it, to the family who needs to benefit from that introduction. Now, I'm not going to say anything terribly shocking here. We live in politically challenging times. There are threats to the processes that we have established that will potentially diminish the opportunities for patients to benefit from the new knowledge that's generated through pharmacogenomics, even pharmacoepigenomics, and so on. You know, we all know that research and development is an international activity, especially, excuse me, especially when looking at targeted therapies for small populations. And that's likely to be increasingly the case when looking at pharmacogenomic outcomes. Now, at the moment, the UK has a global leadership position in biomedical research and development. Of the recently established European reference networks, 24 ERNs have been set up for rare diseases. The UK leads 6 out of 24 of these ERNs and has a greater number of healthcare institutions in membership of the ERN than any other European nation. But the legislation set up to allow ERNs to be established requires that healthcare institutions in membership are situated in a member state. So will Brexit threaten our ability to share and develop expertise? Or can we create the political will, not just here, but also in Europe, to ensure that British expertise continues to play a part in developing standards for the care and the delivery of innovation to patients right across Europe, in the UK and in the rest of the EU, once Brexit kicks in? Now, patients and families are strongly committed to working in a pan-European and even in a global context. But we need to make sure that that concern remains high on the agenda of those charged with negotiating our exit from the European Union. And it's not just a European issue. There is a challenge to patient access here in the UK. A report published last week from the Office of Health Economics shows that the UK lags behind just about every other Western European nation in terms of the access to orphan medicinal products, innovative therapies for small populations, compared with any other Western European country just about. And the situation is likely to get worse with the recent announcement from NICE and NHS England, where the Highly Specialised Technologies Programme is proposing to introduce a cost per quality threshold of 100,000 rising to 300,000, as we heard from the previous speaker. Now that sounds like an awful lot of money for a therapy, but in the 3 years since NICE introduced its HST process, it's managed to produce opinions on 4 therapies. None of those would have breached the expected 10 additional QALYs, much less the 30 QALYs that are required for a £300,000 ceiling. So, you know, the bar is being set, in a sense, unfeasibly high. Because these drugs that are out there that are being currently made available are life-changing drugs for the patients who take them. You know, you heard about ivacaftor this morning. There are others, enzyme replacement therapies for inborn errors of metabolism, which have changed life expectancy from nasty, brutish, and short to normal. But they still don't tick the box of the cost per quality calculation that NICE is proposing. And this, you know, the rhetoric from government is about make the UK your go-to place for clinical development. We've got the Accelerated Access Review, we've got measures in place to encourage the use of NHS facilities for clinical development. But where's the joined up government that says, yes, you can do your development here, but don't expect us to buy it at the end of it and make it use to patients? You know, what sort of contrary incentive is that telling to those who want to avail themselves of the British opportunities, the expertise that is there in our universities and hospitals to create really effective therapies that incorporate the best of this novel technology? Similarly, NHS is proposing a budget impact test, a net cost of 20 million to the NHS. But any cost savings to social care are they don't enter into the equation. Yet if you can reduce somebody's dependency and their need for social care at home is thereby reduced, why exclude it? It's all public money that's paying for it, but this silo budgeting is not helping to create a framework where we can properly evaluate the effectiveness of these technologies coming out of the research that's being undertaken. So we need to have that joined up policy making, and we need to be able to advocate strongly and knowledgeably about the real benefits that we stand to gain from the research that we've heard about so eloquently presented today. So what do we want as patients, as families, as carers, as partners, for those of us who have life-limiting diseases that you potentially have the skills, the knowledge, the opportunity to create remedies for? First of all, we want recognition. We didn't choose to be patients with life-limiting diseases. And by the way, at this point, I will remind you that good health is just an incomplete diagnosis. At some point, it is highly likely that you will all need interventions from to solve a complex problem that may require innovative technologies to help you get over it. I hope you don't need those for a very long time to come, but at some point it is likely that you will. So we want to recognize that we don't have a choice here. There's no kudos in having a disease which is poorly understood, which is expensive to treat, which not many people know about. We want partnership. We want to be part of the process alongside you. And that doesn't mean that we have to fit in with what you do. It means that we all have to move together to create a framework that is efficiency. We want transparency. What counts as evidence? How much does it weigh in the equation that determines whether or not the health service is likely to be able to deliver? How are decisions made, and by whom, as to whether something should be introduced? We want honesty from all the stakeholders. Industry must be able to demonstrate that if it's seeking a high price for an intervention, that high price is a fair price, that it reflects the true cost of development, the difficulty of production, and that it's not simply a company gaming the system in order to get maximum short-term advantage. We want efficiency in the sharing of data and new knowledge. If something's known over here, somebody over here shouldn't have to do it themselves again to re-know that information. So, pre-competitive sharing needs to be a greater part of the way in which therapies are developed. We want sustainability. The current system of, we'll pay until we run out of money assumes that the first out of the box is necessarily the best out of the box. And we all know that that's not true. And we need flexibility so that the potential of new knowledge can be brought to bear on addressing the problems of patients and families without undue delay, without avoidable suffering being allowed to happen, and where there is a continued commitment to investing in high-quality biomedical research. Because despite the progress we've made in the last 20 or 30 years, we must remember that the vast majority of diseases remain intractable. Many of them are incurable. Not a few of them are life-limiting. And none of us wants to be in a position where there are opportunities that will alleviate the situation that we find ourselves in. But for whatever reason, we are unable to access them because the system is unable or unwilling to deliver them for us. So, easy really, that's what patients want, but isn't that what we all want? So, as the broadcaster John Ebden used to say, if you have been, thank you for listening. And now, I hear the opportunities, the RCGP's fine wines are being uncorked as we speak. There is a delectable array of vintage wines being prepared for your enjoyment. So, thank you.